What's interesting to note is that the brain naturally organizes thoughts when it's in flow states. Okay, it's a psychological term that comes from research into creativity. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But it turns out that when we're in those states of consciousness, the brain naturally organizes thoughts. So let's talk about the second problem. The second problem is that you have all these ideas, but you're just so overwhelmed that you lose all energy, right? The term is dispirited. And I'm sure you felt this before. You're like, oh man, I just want to give up. I just do not want to do this anymore. Right? It could apply to anything, right? It could apply to your job, to your homework, to cleaning your house. We get out, you get that feeling like I'm just done with this, right? The sixth aspect is about dealing with this experience, dealing with this feeling of dispiritedness. So let's take a look at the creative process and all the problems we have to deal with. We have to deal with the problem of complacency, the problem of negativity, the problem of all the conditioning that we went through growing up, the problem of social pressure and social conformity, the problem of self-criticism and the censorship, right? Our inner critic always telling us this is not good, this is dangerous, don't do it. I mean, it's hard to be creative. It's hard to transform and to, grow into something different. It's not easy. So how do we deal with this? How do we deal with all of these problems that come about when we're trying to be creative? It's way easier just to sit on your couch and just be the way you've always been, right? That's easy. So what do we need in order to overcome all of these obstacles? I'll give you a hint. What's the one characteristic that's shared amongst people who are creative? Motivation, right? They had to have the desire to do it. So if you find yourself in this stage of the process where you have a bunch of ideas, but either you just lack the energy, right? Which happens to all of us. What you need is to develop some way of motivating yourself. Traditionally, if you take a look at basic psychology from the turn of the century, we were often taught that what's needed is either some force pulling us forward or some force pushing us ahead. And what do you mean by force? What we mean is we need to tap into some sort of emotion. Think about the relationship between those two words. Motivation is about moving. Emotion, energy for moving. It turns out that the key to motivation is about tapping into some sort of feeling, some sort of emotion. And as I said, traditionally, it's often thought of that if something hurts too bad, then you'll do something about it. If the relationship is at a point where it just hurts too bad to stay, then you leave. If the job gets to the point where it's just you suffer too much from being there, then you eventually leave. Or something attracts you, pulls you forward. So think about what sorts of things might pull you forward to get you feeling good. Well, it's usually what you want, right? Think about what you want. If you can imagine what life would be like once you get that partner, once you get that new job, once you move to that new area, that positive feeling usually gives us the energy to move forward, right? So oftentimes motivation is seen as the result of some emotion. You need to tap into some sort of emotion to propel you. If you've been a part of some athletic team, you probably had somebody give you a pep talk, right? And the pep talk, if you literally wrote it out, might be complete nonsense. But the way they say it, right? The way they scream at you or the way they're crying when they tell you about it, it taps into emotion. It taps into the feeling that is the energy for movement. It turns out that tapping into these feelings, these emotions to move us, we do this naturally when we're in flow states. So whatever this flow states thing is, it seems to help organize our thoughts and it seems to give us motivation to act, which is no wonder that this whole idea of flow states comes from creativity research. Because when you are building something, making something, you often get into these states where all your thoughts are organized and when you're completely motivated to act. So the research for this was done by a psychiatrist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He was a psychology professor at the University of Chicago for a really long time. And he was interested in learning about creativity. So what he did was he would give volunteers, participants in the study, pagers. Every once in a while, randomly page them and ask them what they were doing and how they were feeling. Okay? So over the years, he collected a big database of what people were doing and what they were feeling. When people were feeling the happiest, what do you think they were doing? Don't we sometimes have this idea that, man, I'd be so much happier if I was like sipping a pina colada by a beach? Isn't that like a lot of people's goal? Like, yeah, if I could just like go on vacation in Hawaii right now, I'd be pretty happy. Or yeah, if I could just like spend some time vegetating in front of my TV, catching up on my Netflix, I would just be so happy right now. The studies showed that people were the happiest when they were completely engaged with an activity. So they would often say things like, yeah, I was doing this thing and the ideas they were flowing out of me. Oh yeah, I was participating in the sport, right? When you paged me. And when I was playing, all my movements, they were just flowing out of me. It felt like I was in the flow of the game. And you probably hear lots of stories about this, right? Where athletes will say stuff like, man, the basketball hoop was so big. I felt like I was in the zone. Or maybe you've experienced it when you were writing and you were, stuck with the paper, but then all of a sudden you got in this zone while you were writing where the words just came out of your hands. And it felt like it was flowing out of you. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi noticed that a lot of the times these people were describing their experiences when they were most happy. They used this word flow. They were in the flow of it. It flowed out of them. So he termed this state flow states. And a lot of creative artists, creative people would be describing how they were in the middle of doing their art or creating whatever it is they're creating when he pages them. And, the ideas are flowing onto their canvas. The ideas are flowing out of their hands and onto the piano. And when they were pressed to describe what it was like, they said things like, I was completely focused. I lost complete track of time, right? My body was just so energized to keep going. Have you ever gotten so engaged with something, so into it, that you lost track of time, that you kind of tune everything else out? Maybe you started at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and all of a sudden you look at the clock, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning because of how engaged you were with what you're doing, how much in the flow you were. Yeah, right, Denise? It happens to all of us every once in a while. But what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi did was he was able to identify variables to make it happen more often. One thing he noticed was that all of these people, when they were in the flow, they had a clear sense of goals. They had a clear idea of where they were going, right? Think back to the reference of the box for the puzzle. They had a clear sense of where they were going. And think of how that works. Because if you have that clear sense, it kind of acts as a magnet pulling you there. So if you have a project, if you just imagine what it might look like, if you just imagine the feeling of what it would feel like to complete it, right? That might give you energy to push you forward. It doesn't even matter if that's where you eventually go. You just need energy to move, says Mihai, right? That clear sense of purpose helps direct your attention. Of course, this means for us, you have to define it for yourself, right? The creative process, one where you tear down what you thought you were supposed to do. So the issue that makes it hard for a lot of us is we have to define those goals for ourselves. And this is one of the reasons it's so important to identify your 5-year goals. Some people say you need that as a magnet to pull you forward, to focus your attention. Because if you don't have the goal set, written down somewhere that you're reminded of where you want to go, you can lose track, and your mind becomes defocused to the point where you're not putting energy to getting to where you want to go. 2, he says it's easier to get into these flow states when you notice progress. When you notice that you're progressing towards something. I'm gonna give you an example here. Let's pretend you want to lose weight. Maybe you don't care about your weight, but some people do. So let's pretend you want to lose weight. Let's say you wanted to lose like 20 pounds to get ready for a party you're going to later. Maybe a Thanksgiving party later on in the month. Okay, so I gotta lose 10 pounds, I gotta lose 10 pounds. So you work really hard, right? You go to gym like once a day, you watch your diet, put lots more vegetables in your diet. So you do this for like a whole week. You're like, yeah, man, I worked out. I really put effort in my diet. And then you step on the scale and you're like bummed out. Like, man, I only lost 1 pound. For all that work, I only lost 1 pound. So you go, okay, I'm going to work out even harder this week. I'm going to do 2 hours worth of aerobic exercise. I'm going to eat salads for all my meals. So you do that, right? 2 hours in the gym, salads every day. You look on the scale at the end of the week and you're like, oh, man, 2 pounds. I lost just 2 pounds. This sucks. You go back and you say to yourself, okay, one last week, I am going to work out 4 hours a day. Forget school, forget work. I'm going to go to the gym 4 hours a day. I'm going to eat 1 peanut per day. By the way, some people do this. I mean, 1 peanut. That's all I'm going to do for the whole week. 4 hours at the gym, 1 peanut a day, every day for 1 week. They go back on the scale, look at it. Oh, man, I just lost another pound. Forget this. I'm going to quit. I'm going to go with my couch and just eat potato chips all day long. What did this person neglect? What did they fail to notice? What was actually happening every week? Yeah. He neglected to notice that he was losing 1 pound per week. That's not bad. But if your eyes are set to 20 pounds, 1 pound per week feels small. But how do you get to 20? I mean, you string together 20 of those weeks. A lot of the times, let me know if I'm wrong, we can often neglect to notice how we are making incremental change and we get discouraged by it. So you have a project. It's going to be painful and maybe dispiriting if you don't acknowledge how every time you work on it, you're progressing. Because even if you don't actually make something tomorrow or the next day, I mean, all of that experience is something for you to write about. That's all part of the process. Even getting stuck is part of it. That's progress. That's something that you can put into your papers. So find a way to realize the progress you are making. One last thing he mentioned. He often noticed that the people that were in these flow states found a balance between something being too hard and something being too easy. If it's too easy, we get bored. If it's too hard, we get discouraged. And people that are in these flow states often find that sweet spot right in between where it's not too hard and not too easy. So think about your projects with regards to this. If something is too hard, what could you do? Yeah, right, Andrew? Break it up into smaller parts. Misael says maybe look at it from a different perspective. Maybe you can find a way of looking at it where it doesn't seem so challenging, perhaps. What else could you do? Make it more fun. Sure. Do something with it so that you enjoy it. Because it's often easier to tackle problems when you're doing something you like, which is one of the reasons why I let you choose your projects, because I want you to choose something you want to do. This is supposed to be inherently fun for you. I know it's hard to be fun when it's, assigned, right? So you have to find a way to make it fun, to not focus on the fact that it's assigned. You could also get help. You could simplify your project. Maybe don't aim so high. The last way to enter the flow states that we did not talk about last class was following intrinsic motivations. So make sure you have this in your notes. Psychology tells us that there are different types of motivators in our lives. And some motivators actually help with creativity, and some motivators get in the way of creativity. To get into flow states, we are told, follow intrinsic motivators. And what does that mean? Extrinsic refers to outside. So I'm going to do something because there's a reward for it. I'm going to do something because I'm forced to. I'm going to do something because I'm going to get a pat in the back as a result. Those are all extrinsic motivators. Then you're doing something because of something you get, something from the outside that happens to you. Intrinsic motivation, intrinsic motivators refers to something from within you. It's when you do something just because you love to do it. So as we said a second ago, flow states are more naturally occurring when we follow intrinsic motivations. So with whatever you're doing with your project, try to do it in a way that you're enjoying. I mean, you get to choose what you do. So do something that gives you enjoyment. Do something you actually want, right? And if you start working on your project and you're like, man, I don't really care about this, then change it. It's okay to change it, right? This is your project. This is for you. And you can even write about the change. It gives you more stuff to write about. Studies seem to show that extrinsic motivation gets in the way of creativity. Why would extrinsic motivation, like rewards, obligations, a grade, why would extrinsic motivation get in the way of you being creative? Yeah.
I was gonna say, you don't really have that much passion in it.
You don't have much passion in it? Yeah, possibly, yeah. Muhammad says being rewarded from society. So why would being rewarded from society make it, oh, so if it's reward from society, then you're less likely to do something different, maybe, Muhammad? Is that kind of what you're pointing to? Yeah. I mean, so what some of the researchers say is that when you have, I mean, imagine, have we talked about reading a book in our class? So, you know, some people enjoy reading, right? Maybe you enjoy reading naturally. But what happens when it's assigned to you? When it's assigned to you, you feel like you have to do it. And you say, Denise, right. With extrinsic motivation, you tend to stress. You tend to overthink because now you're concerned about doing it right. So the studies were done with kids, you know, and you give them some crayons and some paper, and they'll naturally like draw some really creative things. But when you tell them, hey, so the most creative drawing gets to win a prize. But then all of a sudden the kids get kind of stressed out and they start worrying about winning the prize. And that stress prohibits their creativity because they're so worried about it. So I know it's a project that you're working on. I know it's a grade. So it may feel like you have to do this for extrinsic motivation. You have to trick yourself. And maybe it's not even a trick, right? Maybe forget the grade, forget trying to, you know, pass the class. Just do something for yourself. The whole reason that I give you the option to choose what you want is because I want you to do this for yourself. So just do it for yourself. Do something, do whatever you feel like you want to do. Okay. So keep in mind intrinsic motivation when you are trying to complete your projects. So this could be in many ways, right? You don't have to change your project. You can even just change the way you approach your project. If you're into music, then, you know, play music while you do your project. If you're into humor, well, make some jokes. You know, find a way to laugh as you're working on your project. If you're into something like excellence, if that's what really drives you, then whatever it is you work on, try to make it the best that you can make it. Right. So it's really just about how you approach the project. You can approach it in a way that activates intrinsic motivations.